Thank you very much for the welcome. Chancellor Bustamante, to the vice presidents of the school who are here and the other officers, the Honorable Mayor of Lima, the Mayor of Surco, Trade Minister Orozco, and to the United States Ambassador, thank you very much for coming. And I'd like to thank Sol Carrena for the introduction. I am particularly honored to be here at this institution because I have had a good relationship with Doug Becker, the chairman of the Laureate International Universities, and I believe that this school and the others in the network are doing a very important thing by making higher education more available, more linked to institutions throughout the world, and more relevant. I told the Chancellor that 2 members of my government when I was president are now involved in the Laureate's efforts, including my Secretary of Education, Richard Riley, and Laureate's Chief Academic Officer, Joe Duffy, who was head of the United States Information Agency during my term. This is a very exciting trip for me because even though I have been to well over 100 nations, this is the very first time I have ever been to Peru. It's ironic because when I was president, I spent quite a lot of time on Peruvian issues. I was involved in helping to resolve the border dispute with Ecuador, and I will never forget the end of the negotiations when the leaders of both countries said that in order to settle the border dispute, the United States would have to be a guarantor of the agreement and that I would have to send troops to the border. Those of you who know where the border is know that it is way out in what we would call the country at home, in the rainforest. And I said, well, how many troops do you want? I have troops in Bosnia, I have troops in the Middle East, I have troops in 70 countries. They said, oh, 8 or 10 should do the job. I think it was the smallest military deployment of my presidency and perhaps the happiest. I'm still not sure that we got all the soldiers back. They may still be out there somewhere. And there never was any trouble, and for that I'm very grateful. It was also my honor to support Peru's membership in APEC, the Asian Pacific Economic Council, and to work to help to increase the capacity of the government to deal with narco-trafficking and other security challenges. But I'm here today on another mission, visiting projects and people who are involved with the work of our foundation to create jobs, increase incomes, improve health, and address other challenges to make your development sustainable over the long run. I'd like to begin by saying that I believe the modern world can be characterized overwhelmingly in one word: by its interdependence. It means simply that our fates are bound up together. Interdependence can be good or bad or both. I think it's obvious what the good things about interdependence are. Peru has enjoyed a remarkable amount of growth in the last few years, aided in part by the trade agreement with the United States, which I strongly supported. It is projected that you may be the only country in Latin America this year to enjoy positive growth amidst the global financial crisis. But here and elsewhere, we see that there are 3 fundamental challenges to the age of interdependence. The first is a persistent inequality in incomes, education, and healthcare. The second is a persistent instability that people everywhere face, from organized crime and narco-trafficking, terrorist groups and dangerous weapons, and lately the inadequacy of the global financial network to deal with the global economy. The third challenge is that the whole growth model on which we have come this far is unsustainable because of the undeniable reality of climate change. So it seems to me, if you accept these things, that all of us who are privileged to have an education have a clear mission. We have to deal with these three challenges, build up the positive forces of interdependence, and reduce the negative ones. We have, in other words, to build a world where we share benefits, share opportunities, and share responsibilities. A world in which we share a sense of our community, where we do not pretend that there are no differences, we celebrate our differences, but we believe our common humanity matters more. The question is how to do this in today's world when there seems to be bad news every day about the global economy. As I said, Peru's economy, compared to most others, remains in good shape. But global demand will decrease this year, and that will inevitably have some impact on employment and incomes. In Peru, there has been a big reduction in poverty in the last several years, but now with the current crisis, the people most affected in every country will be those who are already poor. That means you will have to face the fact that more people may lack adequate nutrition. More people may not get the food they need. Indeed, some people estimate that hunger could rise in rural areas to as high as 40% of the population. The income of the wealthiest 10% of your population is 40 times greater than the poorest 10%. And the poor have not made commensurate gains in the economic boom of the last few years, so that the benefits of prosperity have not been equally distributed. Let not this be misunderstood as a criticism, because the numbers in America and in most wealthy countries are just as bad, if not worse. In this decade in the United States, 90% of the benefits of growth went to only the top 10% of the population. The top 1% reaped 43% of the income gains, and 8 years after I left office, median family income after inflation was $2,000 lower than it was the day I left office. This is all before the financial crisis. This problem of the maldistribution of income is a problem being faced all over the world. And I might say it has a parallel 100 years or so ago when people all over the world moved from the farms to the cities, when we moved from an agricultural to an industrial economy. Vast new fortunes were made, but there was great inequality and a real challenge to figure out how to build a balanced society of social justice. The same thing is happening today. I will explain in a minute that it's very interesting that among the wealthy countries, the only countries in this decade that did not have an increase in inequality were those that created vast numbers of new jobs with a commitment to clean energy and had strong social safety nets. This problem has been going on for a long time. Since 1973, when we felt the full impact of all the countries going off the global standard, building an international financial network, the United States has had increasing inequality in every year except 4. During my second term, when we created so many new jobs and we had sufficient support for middle class and working families that inequality actually decreased. Then, when we adopted a different set of tax and social policies in this decade, it started again. So I say this to say that should you deal with the challenge? You should, you must, but you are not alone. There are very few countries in the world which have escaped it. But if you're looking for guidance, you can look at what happened in Denmark, Sweden, and the United Kingdom before the financial collapse. All of them had declining inequality because they had tremendous job growth accompanied by social supports for working families. Now we have to deal with all this in the midst of the global economic crisis. I know that Peru recently passed a large spending package designed to maintain investment and employment levels and increase public works projects. I'm sure you know that in the United States, we did the same thing, approving nearly $800 billion to provide money to working people so they could continue to consume, to save approximately 1 million jobs in education and health primarily, and to create new jobs, mostly from investments in transportation, water and sewer infrastructure, and clean energy and energy efficiency related projects. Now, following on this, President Obama and his economic team have also proposed some reforms in our financial system so that we do our part to bring the economy of the world back and don't cause future problems. They've made proposals which they're implementing to make our banks healthier, to help 9 million American homeowners to avoid foreclosure, and to improve regulation to make sure that the things that have just happened do not happen again. For whatever it's worth, I think that their approach is the right one. I think it will work over time. Since it is unprecedented, there may have to be adjustments as we go along, but these are smart people who want to do the right thing by Americans and by the rest of the world. So I feel some significant confidence in that. And I also believe that similar efforts in Europe and Asia and Latin America will have a reinforcing effect. I believe that we have to see this, however, we Americans, this effort to bring the economy back so that it works for our people, as only one of our big challenges. Because our second big challenge is to restore my country's leadership for peace and prosperity, for security and social justice, at a time when we have become alienated from much of the world, including our neighbors in Latin America. I believe that America must do its part to help the people in the rest of the world, even as we deal with our own challenges, to empower the poor, and to support the nations who are trying to do the same for all their people. This is particularly true in Latin America. President Obama has made it clear that he is going to make a priority of restoring our relations in Latin America. And the Secretary of State, I think he made a very good appointment for Secretary of State, by the way. The Secretary of State had just come from a trip to Mexico where she received an enormous amount of publicity and some criticism in America for stating the obvious, that the Mexican drug problem is partly a problem of American demand and the ease with which people can have narco-trafficking groups import weapons that are highly deadly from America to fuel the conflict they're having with the Mexican army. I think it's a good thing for friends to tell each other the truth and to work forward together. So they'll both be in South America soon, and that's all I have to say about government policy, except that I feel good about it, and I think they're moving in the right direction. I want to talk to you about something very different, and that is what the rest of us have to do, because I believe citizen action is important. Civil society has a big role to play in the modern world. This university, given the way it was established and the network it's part of, I see as part of civil society. My foundation, the work we do in energy and combating HIV and AIDS and malaria around the world, the work we're here to do, which I'll speak more about in a minute. This is all part of figuring out how we can all be a part of the positive changes that need to be made today. The reason I came to Peru is to work with a man named Frank Zustra, who's sitting over here to my left, a friend and entrepreneur from Canada, who after decades of working with the mining industry thought there was an enormous opportunity for the natural resources industry to use their business models, connections, and investment to improve communities in areas in which they operate, to advance job creation, environmental protection, healthcare, education, to develop sustainable methods of long-term development, even when the mines are no longer there. Frank's effort has been joined by Carlos Slim and others who want to have business make a positive contribution to creating jobs, raising incomes, even in areas that are extremely poor. The goal of this effort, which we call the Clinton-Juster Sustainable Development Initiative, is that when the mines operate, the effort will be designed to make sure that all people benefit, even those that don't directly benefit. And when the mines close, the effort is successful will ensure that all those communities are better off over the long run. Today we sign an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the government of Peru, that will advance the delivery of 50,000 cataract surgeries over the next 3 years. Cataracts are treatable causes of blindness and poor eyesight, yet many thousands of people in Peru still lack access to treatment. This kind of work is terribly important, especially in the midst of the global recession, because the poor are affected most. We need to think about all the ways that we can take on the challenges that government, the business sector, and civil society must do together. Here in Peru, my foundation also works to help provide lower cost antiretroviral medicine to people suffering from HIV and AIDS. And through our climate change initiative, we work with the mayor, and I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here, on trying to develop a new clean transportation system, which I understand will be dedicated later in the year, adopt the most efficient lighting systems for street lights available anywhere in the world, with the goal of lowering greenhouse gas emissions, increasing economic opportunity, and saving money for the cities. Peru has also benefited from another thing that my foundation is involved in, the annual meeting of the Clinton Global Initiative. Since 2005, we bring together at the opening of the United Nations in New York in September, global leaders, business executives, philanthropists, and heads of nonprofit organizations to figure out how to take action on the world's most pressing problems. In just 4 years, these people have made more than 1,400 commitments, valued at $46 billion over a decade of spending, to improve more than 200 million lives in more than 150 countries. One of those commitments was made by Doug Becker and the Laureate Education, Inc., to award 1,000 Richard Riley scholarships this year to deserving high school teachers to help them obtain their master's degree in education. 1,000 more good teachers, maximally trained, will improve the quality of education everywhere they go. Peru also has other commitments that came out of the Clinton Global Initiative in health and education, the economy, but my favorite is from Ciudad Saludable, to improve the lives of what are commonly called waste scavengers, people who make a living basically combing through the piles of garbage in the landfills of the world. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire about Mumbai in India, but the opening scene has children playing a stickball game on an airport runway, and the police come to run them off because otherwise the planes may land on them. When the children run away back to the slum in which they live in Mumbai, they run over the landfill. It goes on forever. Hundreds and hundreds of yards of garbage. And as they run over the landfill away from the police, you see people scavenging in the landfill looking for something of value that they can sell just to buy enough food to stay alive. This project aims to give dignity and permanent employment to people who do this by turning them into recycling workers, showing them how to basically market glass and metal and any other thing that can be recycled. What I hope it will be is the beginning of a project that will take everything that's left, all the organic material, and do what we're trying to do in Lagos, Nigeria, in Mumbai, in Delhi, in India, in Mexico City. Take all the organic material that's left and either turn it into fertilizer for the farmers, biofuels for cars, or my personal favorite, compact it and use it as a source of clean electricity. This is an enormous opportunity if we can just work the financing out to recover land that the city can use for playgrounds, for housing, for development, to end a public health problem, to generate clean energy, and to prove that even in countries with far lower incomes than Peru, there are ways to create wealth and jobs by fighting climate change. And so this is something that I've been very excited about, and I'm very grateful for what has been done to date. And Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for your cooperation and your leadership, and pledge that I will do what I can to be a good partner from here on out. But here's the most important thing I want to say today. If you believe that the world is interdependent, if you believe that that has good and bad consequences, then we all have a responsibility to do what we can to make it better, to build the positive forces and reduce the negative forces. Every private citizen has a public responsibility. That is the meaning of civil society, to fill in the gaps in what government and the private sector cannot do alone, and wherever possible, to do it faster and at lower cost. That raises the main question: how? How do you go about taking the best of intentions and turning them into positive changes that benefit other people? That is the question that you must ask and the question you must answer. But over the last decade, all over the world, more and more people are saying, I think I have a better idea about how to solve a problem. And that has led to an explosion of non-governmental organizations. In the United States, there are now about 1 million NGOs, 50% of them formed in the last 10 years. In India, there are more than 500,000. In China, there are about 500,000. Everywhere I go, they are exploding on every single continent. And sometimes they have money and give it to people who don't. Sometimes they have no money, but they do what they do so well they can get money. In the best of cases, they work with government and the private sector. That's what we do with our AIDS program, for example, where we now have 1.5 million people around the world on the world's least expensive AIDS medicine, and we never go anywhere the government doesn't ask us. And the same is true of climate change. These NGOs have more impact than ever before, in no small measure because of the impact of the internet. In fact, one of the most interesting things that's happening is the spread of cell phone technology to the poorest parts of the world. In Africa, for example, every 10% increase in cell phone penetration leads to an increase in the country's GDP of 0.6%, just by simply empowering people to make new connections. I saw this when I worked for 2 years in South Asia after the horrible tsunami. And we were charged in the beginning with just getting all these fishermen who had lost their boats, or their families who had to get back into fishing when someone in their family had died. We just tried to get the boats back. But what we learned is all the fishermen who also had a cell phone all of a sudden were making much more money than they did before the tsunami hit, because they created their own markets. They could no longer be forced to accept a price for their fish that was too low. They knew they had options. These are the kinds of things that the non-governmental movement are doing all over the world. They are answering the question, how do you turn good intentions into real changes? And basically, even though I very much enjoyed my life in politics and I love being president, this is what I spend my time doing now, trying to help people in every corner of the world take their good intentions and turn them into positive changes. Answering the question, how? Perhaps people in government here and in the media will identify with this, but when I was in politics for 35 years, almost every time a discussion was held about any issue, there were two questions asked. What are you going to do, and how much money are you going to spend on it? There was almost no attention given to the most important question. How are you going to do it? Given any given amount of money, how are you going to make the most of that to have the largest positive impact in people's lives? So we're in the how business now in our foundation. How do you make the most reduction in greenhouse gases while creating jobs even in the poorest countries? How do you get the most medicine out to people suffering with HIV/AIDS and now with malaria? And how can you build healthcare networks in countries where the government can't possibly afford to finance the clinics themselves in rural areas? These are the kinds of things that we need to face. But let me just give you an example to give you some hope. A few years ago, when antiretroviral medicine began to be widely available, children still almost got none. And small children have to have special pediatric medicine. They can't digest the regular antiretrovirals. In all the poor countries of the world, there were only 10,000 children getting that medication. And they were in 2 countries where the government paid for it. So a foundation gave me enough money to double that to 20,000. But 500,000 children were dying every year. Then a group called Untitled was created, funded by the French tax on international airlines and contributions from more than 20 other countries. Today, our foundation, in partnership with Untitled, provides medicine to 2/3 of all the children in developing countries who are getting it to keep them alive. Here's the most important thing. When we started, the medicine cost $600 a child a year. Just by doubling the volume, we took it down to $190. Now that same medicine costs $60 a person a year. The price was cut 90% by the non-governmental sector going in saying, hey, let's change the business model. You have a low volume, so you charge a high profit margin. Besides, you're never quite sure you're going to be paid. Suppose we gave you a high volume and made it certain you'd be paid, would you take a low profit margin? They said yes. As a result, we can now save 9 times as many lives given a constant amount of dollars. However much money is given, we can do that. I have to take my hat off a little to Peru here on the whole question of antiretroviral medicine. All the people in our AIDS project tell me that this is the best country we've worked in Latin America, making the most comprehensive, systematic efforts to provide large numbers of people the medicine at the lowest possible price. Here, ironically, in Latin America, we haven't had as much success in getting the prices down, partly because you're more prosperous as a continent than most of the African countries we work in and many of the East Asian countries we work in. So you have a rising pharmaceutical industry in South America, and there are various patent barriers we have to negotiate here that keep us from getting the prices as low as possible, but you have done the best. And I thank you for that, helping us to answer the question, how? So think of the questions you need to ask. How could you close all your landfills and create real dignified permanent jobs for the people who now scavenge in them for barely enough to live on? How could you have more students in universities? And is there some way to take the model that is here so successful and spread it around or bring more people here? How can you do more with the mining companies that come here to work in good faith with this Clinton-Justra initiative to make sure that you grow the economy, improve health and education, and preserve rather than undermine the environment? How can you develop your natural gas here in a way that makes you more energy independent without harming the fragile ecostructure where a lot of the gas reserves are? There are lots of how questions to be asked and answered in Peru. This week with Microsoft, my foundation unveiled a new emissions tool, which, Mr. Mayor, you might want to use. It's the first of its kind, and Lima, Bogota, Buenos Aires, Rio, and Sao Paulo, and Mexico City are all eligible to use it. And the mayor's office, I said this to give him a little credit, has already said they want to do it. This is the first time a city will be able to use a Microsoft-developed program to actually measure its current level of greenhouse gas emissions, any changes up or down from decisions that are made, and develop models that will prove there are some things you can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that will actually generate more jobs and higher incomes while helping to save the planet. I never ask anybody to do anything that's not good business. We just try to make it good business. So these are the kinds of things that I hope that all of you will think more about. The how question. There's no doubt that this interdependent world is both good and bad. I look out at you and I know, just looking at you, that for virtually everyone in this audience, it's been more good than bad. But we also know there are people who aren't here for whom there have been more troubles than benefits. This is, in many ways, the most interesting time to be alive in all of human history because of all the advances in the biological sciences, because of all the explosion of technology. What we have to do is to make sure that the positive outweighs the negative, that we advance prosperity and social justice, peace and freedom and security. That means there must be a global how movement led by people who are mostly young, or those like me who think we're still young at heart. We can't wait for someone else to do it. So I urge you to think about these things, to find the other people here who are doing these kinds of projects and get involved. Because we really are all in this interdependent world together. And all interdependence means is that divorce is not an option. We can no more run away from our common fate than we can leap tall buildings in a single bound. We have to realize that as important as our differences are, our common humanity matters more. If we just accept that simple value and all do what we can to answer the question how, I believe the future will turn out just fine. Thank you very much.